Hi, my name is Kelp, and this is The Lion of Poetry. This is our 25th episode, and I've decided, at least for now, that this will be our final episode of The Lion of Poetry. My original goal was 50 poets in 50 episodes, and the original mandate was to keep each episode more or less at 5 minutes. As you know, we weren't able to stick to that 5-minute mandate. The average episode length is more like 11 minutes, and we have a couple of times even gone to 17 minutes. I had no idea at the outset how much time and energy each episode would entail. Literally hours and hours of preparation time. The Lion of Poetry has taken control of my life. It's killing me. It's tearing me apart. Yeah, so I think of one of my favorite authors, the author Bill Bryson, in his book, A Walk in the Woods, in which he sets a goal for himself to walk the entire length of the Appalachian Trail, which is 2,190 miles. The terrain is mostly mountainous and is grueling and demanding, not a walk in the woods, as the title of his book ironically suggests. Bryson gets outfitted with all the equipment, he reads books and does research, he trains himself, he gets a hiking partner, and then they start out on the trail. And at first, it's extremely difficult, but they push themselves and start to get good at it. The discipline of hiking, of surviving the obstacles and challenges of living in the wild, including weather extremes and wild animals. But it is tough, and at some point, several weeks into the journey, they're at a rest area. And Bryson looks at a map of the trail and realizes that they have only completed about 700 miles. Appalachian Trail is 2,190 miles. They haven't even come close to the halfway point. At this point, Bryson turns to his hiking partner and says, "It's enough. We got the idea of it. The rest of it, if we survive it, will be more or less the same thing. Enough." And this didn't stop Bryson from writing his book. 700 miles on the Appalachian Trail is still an accomplishment, just as 25 episodes of The Lion of Poetry is. Of course, my regret is that there are dozens of poets that I would have loved to discuss with you. Although his bobblehead has been watching over us throughout, we won't get to discuss Shakespeare, for example. But to be fair, I was going to read you one or two of Shakespeare's sonnets, and you can find many terrific presentations of his sonnets on the internet. There's not too much that I can add or improve on in terms of what's already out there on William Shakespeare. In addition to Shakespeare, we sadly will never get to William Blake, or William Butler Yeats, or Edgar Allan Poe, or Tracy K. Smith, or Carl Shapiro, or John Berryman, or Sylvia Plath, or W.H. Auden, or Lorca, or Baudelaire, or Rimbaud, or Rumi, or Tagore, or Sappho, or Goethe, or Rilke, or Margaret Atwood, or A.M. Klein, or Charles Bukowski. All great poets that would have had their own episodes if I had the time and energy to do them. You know, I thought that my project was filling a need, a void out there in cyberspace, but in reality, there are a lot of wonderful poetry sites out there. There's even one called The Line of Poetry, believe it or not. And if my humble site has whetted your appetite for poetry, you can certainly watch reruns of my 25 episodes, catch up on the ones that you may have missed, binge watch the entire series. It'll take you about 4.5 hours. Or just Google one of the poets that I just listed and see what's out there. It'll be time well spent. So, what to cover in the final episode? I wanted to show some gratitude to the ultimate poet. They don't call him the creator for nothing. And if I had the opportunity, I would have explored religious poetry in all its forms. We would have spent some time on Islamic poetry, on Sufi poetry, on Hindu poetry, including the Vedas and the Upanishads, on Aboriginal poetry, on Christian poetry, as well as some of the wonderful Christian poets throughout history, such as John Milton and John Donne. But the tradition that I am most familiar with is the Jewish tradition. The Bible, or the Tanakh, as it's called in Hebrew, is replete with poetry. Indeed, religion and poetry, in my opinion, are intimately interwoven. Both are trying to understand the mysteries and complexities of life and language. Both attempt to express the inexpressible. Every great prophet, from Moses through the Treasar, the 12 minor poets that complete the Tanakh, wrote a book. To be a hero or a prophet in the Jewish tradition is to be a creative spirit, to write a book. Some wrote several, and most of these books are full of poetry. The Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, that Moses and the children of Israel sang at the Red Sea when it was split for them, is one of the first examples, but the first of many. According to tradition, King Solomon wrote 3 books in his life, with perhaps the most important and influential being the Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, an extended lyrical poem which compares God's love for Israel with the love of a man and a woman. The beauty of the language and the metaphors are unparalleled, very evocative, and very explicit. Here's a sampling in translation from Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. How lovely are your feet in sandals, your rounded thighs are like jewels, your belly like a heap of wheat among lilies, your breasts are like 2 fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like a tower of ivory, your eyes like pools. There's much to say about Shir HaShirim, but for this final episode of the Line of Poetry, I would like to focus on the book that was written by King Solomon's father, King David, who, according to tradition, played the lyre or harp and was a singer of songs. King David compiled the Book of Psalms, or in Hebrew, Tehillim. Now, the dictionary defines psalm as a sacred song or hymn. There are 150 in all, and each one a beautiful poem in its own right. And they were a source of solace and hope for Jews throughout history. Many of the psalms play on the theme of faith and comfort in times of trouble or danger, in times of persecution, in times of war, in times of failing health or other crisis. Jews have always recited Tehillim, or psalms, to help them stay hopeful and optimistic. Of course, the psalms were also incorporated into the prayer liturgy, both Jewish and Christian. The 23rd Psalm, for example, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," is an important prayer both for Jews and for Christians. The word hallelujah, which is prominent in gospel services and music, of course has its roots in the Psalms. Both the Talmud and the Zohar state that the word hallelujah is the perfect word, because in a single word you have one of the names of God, Yah, and praise of God, Hallel. Put them together, hallelujah. One word both mentions God's name and praises him at the same time. In this final episode, as a final poem, I would like to spend a few minutes discussing Psalm 98, a psalm that uncharacteristically does not have the word hallelujah in it, but speaks of a glorious future where God rules the world in righteousness. Let's read it first in translation in English. A psalm. Sing to the Lord a new song, for he has worked wonders. His right hand, his holy arm has won him victory. The Lord has manifested his salvation. He has revealed his righteousness in the sight of the nations. He was mindful of his steadfast love and faithfulness toward the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth beheld the salvation of our God. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Make a loud noise and break into joyous songs of praise. Sing praise to the Lord with the lyre and the sound of song, with trumpets and the blast of the horn. Make a joyful noise before the Lord, the King. Let the sea roar and the fullness of it, the world and those who dwell in it. Let the rivers clap their hands, the mountains sing joyously together before the Lord, for he is coming to rule the earth. He will rule the world in righteousness and its peoples with equity. There are 9 short stanzas in this poem that can be broken into 3 groups. The first 3 stanzas allude to the wonders that God will work in the world sometime in the future, such that everyone will recognize him, recognize his existence, his righteousness, and his special relationship to the house of Israel. The second 3 stanzas call for joyful singing in honor of God. And the final 3 stanzas describe how nature itself sings God's praises in a world where everything is right and everyone is treated well. Looking a bit more closely at each stanza, we note that the first words of the psalm are, "Sing to the Lord a new song." The psalm demands creativity, something new. This could mean the creation of the psalm itself, the words of the psalm, or it could be referring to the subject matter of the psalm, that is, describing a new kind of existence, one where God is fully revealed, which is what this psalm is about. The victory then that we see in the words of the psalm is not a military victory, but a victory of perception. People will be able to see his right hand, his holy arm. This, of course, is an anthropomorphizing of God, but the poem is speaking metaphorically. God's right hand and his holy arm are symbols of his righteousness and his rule over all creation. In the third verse, we see that the house of Israel, which has never stopped believing in and trusting God, is rewarded for its faithfulness by God's faithfulness. The next couple of verses describe the musical instruments that were used to celebrate this glorious day of God's revelation. The lyre, which was like a harp, a stringed instrument, the trumpet and the horn, which was the shofar, or ram's horn, which is blown on Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. The implication is that God enjoys this music. Then finally, we see all of nature joins in the celebration. The sea roars, the river claps, the mountains sing. This too seems to be appreciated by God as it is done before him. So one might say that God in this psalm is a poet, soon to be composing a new poem, a new reality, a new revelation, and that we are called upon to all be poets as well, to sing a new song to the Lord. And the seas and the rivers and the mountains have their own form of poetry. The Creator exults in the poetry of his creations, but everyone and everything is called upon to be creative. Now listen to the psalm in Hebrew. We'll recite the first 3 stanzas. Listen for the rhymes, all of which get lost in translation. According to Jewish religious practice, we're going to skirt the mention of God's name, but my theory is that although we are not allowed to fully pronounce God's name, which is sometimes anglicized to sound like Jehovah, this is forbidden to say in Hebrew according to Jewish religious practice. But I have a theory, that the name was pronounced in biblical times when these psalms were most likely sung, accompanied by instruments, as part of the earliest temple services. The reason I believe this is because the way that God's name is pronounced rhymes with some of the other words in the psalm. For example, the word Asa. And this is my proof that they actually pronounce the name instead of using some other replacement name for God. Mizmor, Shiru Lashem, Shir Chadash, Ki Niflaot Asa, Hoshia lo Yemino, Uzroa Kadsho, Hodia Hashem Yeshuato, Le'enei Hagoyim Gila Tzidkato, Zachar Chasto, Ve'emunato, Levet Yisrael, Ra'u kol afsei aretz, et Yeshuat Elokeinu. Pretty amazing. You never heard any of those rhymes in the English translation. Let's continue the next 3 stanzas. And here I'd like you to pay attention to the repetition of certain words, in particular Zamru and Zameru and Zimra, which all mean singing or song. Also the word Kinur is repeated. Kinur means lyre, which is again a stringed instrument. And then keep listening for the rhymes. Hariu Lashem kol haaretz, Pitzchu v'ranenu v'zameru. Zamru l'Hashem b'chinur v'kol zimra. B'chatzatrot v'kol shofar. Hariu lifnei hamelech Hashem. And now the final three stanzas, which describe the songs of nature. Listen in the last line for the repetition of lishpot and yishpot, which means to rule. And for the final couplet, we'll call it, where amim rhymes with mesharim. Yiram hayam umlo'o, tevel v'yoshvei va. Naharot yimchau chaf, yachad harim yiranenu. Lifnei Hashem, kiva lishpot haaretz, yishpot tevel b'tzedek, v'amim b'meisharim. So we've had our chance to say thank you to God. Now let's say thank you to a few important people. First of all, my wife, who is my muse in so many ways, and who has for so many years helped and encouraged me and listened to me yap on and on about poetry, among other topics. Thank you. Thank you to my two children, who are no longer children. Through the line of poetry, I had an opportunity to dedicate an episode to each of them. Both of them are created from me, along with the help of my wife and God. In this way, they are both kind of like poems, but living poems that grow and develop each day. Thank you to my brother Neil, who has always given me good advice and certainly had good advice and feedback for me on this YouTube adventure. Thanks to all my friends and family, particularly those who have provided feedback and encouragement. It was all greatly appreciated. Thanks to all my subscribers, and I hope that there'll be more in the future. Finally, thanks to Noam Bergman, who provided the music and technical support for most of the episodes. He was very much a collaborator and bought in to the Lion of Poetry vision. So, watch the reruns. Share your favorite episodes with your friends, if you haven't already done so, and may your lives be filled with poetry.